Welcome. I'm so glad you could be here this evening with us. I'm so glad there's so many of you on this cold night, this strange weather that suddenly hit us. My name is Linda Hayward. I'm chair of the Board of Trustees at the library, and just so happy to be here with all of you tonight. I want to mention a few things coming up. We have our raffle scallop going on, which is an incredible deal. You buy a few tickets and you've got the chance to win a gallon of scallops, and they freeze well. So that's good to know. That's donated by local fishermen Holly Masters, so you know. And the holiday book sale is going on out there, which supports the library. Thank you very much. You can see the wonderful art we have hanging. And this Friday at 4, I think, is the reception where you can come and meet the artist. And then she's going to talk about the process by which she makes this art. And I don't know myself, but I just find these pictures so happy. The colors and everything, they make me feel good. So, before getting on with tonight's talk, I also need to mention that we have coming up a telehealth connecting with your home care provider, your healthcare provider from home. How to do that? That's next Monday from 11 to 12. In person only, space is limited. Call or go on the website and you click the buttons and reserve your seats as you've all learned, I'm sure. We will be recording this event, which is why Joan is wired. And so for the online audience, if you have questions, there's a place you go at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A, put in your question. Kate Pickup is here and she will add the questions at the end when we have discussion. And turn off your phones. If you haven't already muted them, please do, because especially when we're recording, we don't want to have that going on. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Joan Jordan Brink. She is a native of Bar Harbor, Maine, daughter of Evelyn Kittredge, grandniece of Nell Carroll Thornton, and a fourth-generation descendant of John Carroll. She is a year-round resident of Mount Desert Island, a pastor, a teacher, a spiritual director. As a volunteer for Acadia National Park, she has helped Lydia tell her stories at the Carroll Homestead in Southwest Harbor since 2002. And I really do think I should say, in addition to introducing Joan, this is Lydia. And her stories are what we're here for. So, Joan,
thank you.
Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Thank you for coming, each and every one of you. Love to see your faces. It's so much nicer. I was doing the talk on Zoom last week and was talking to myself. And I so much like seeing faces. So thank you. And Lydia loves faces too. So we're both feeling quite at home. So the story that I'm going to tell you today is about the writing of the book, which is slightly different than just telling you the stories of the Carroll Homestead. But I will try to include also at least one story from the Carroll Homestead, but covering also the broad outline of the Carroll family history here in Southwest Harbor. First, though, as Linda said, I am a descendant of the Carroll families. John Carroll, who built the house in 1825 called the Carroll Homestead, is my great-great-grandfather. So there was an interest early on of finding out something about that Carroll family and the mystique of what happened on that mountain, on that side of that mountain, so many years ago, where we were taken as children and introduced to our heritage. But I was a little confused back then about exactly how we were related. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. The book itself, however, I wrote down the stories so that I could give them to my grandchildren. I have two granddaughters, Emery and Lydia, namesake, and for my son, Ben, their father. So I wanted to be able to hand on something, which I hope this will, if anything, give you an inspiration to write down your stories for your children, grandchildren, those who come after you, even siblings. So that's part of the inspiration of the book itself. What I used for resources were, good to see you. Thank you for coming. What I used for resources were basically notes, some oral accounts, some letters, and primarily a notebook compiled by Nell Carroll Thornton in 1933. So that was the gist of what I was using for background. So the stories in Lydia's stories are stories based on family lore, if you will. So I'm not actually writing traditional, researched, accurate history. I'm writing the stories of the family as they were told to us down through the ages, which is a lot different than going to an encyclopedia or going to somebody who's written down an exact story that's based on the facts as they were recorded in newspapers or in some other third resource. So I'm writing these as stories, but they're also facts because they all happened and these are real people. And hopefully by reading the book, you get to experience these people in their reality as people, not as names and dates back in the past. And I'm very beholden to the women in the Carroll family line who have been the recorders, the scribes, if you will, of these stories, beginning with Rachel herself, who is John Carroll's wife, born in 1791. And she told all the stories that John told her to her daughter, Mary Ann Carroll, who taught them to Rachel's granddaughter, Mary Ann's niece, Nell, and Nell's sisters, Gertrude and Annie Beatrice, and probably all the rest of them. But those are the ones that have left some kind of written record behind them for me to read. The other influence on writing this book was a poem that Nell Carroll Thornton loved, written by Catherine Lee Bates in 1913. She wrote the words to America the Beautiful, if any of you have kind of remembered sort of seeing her name somewhere. She wrote those words after a visit to Pikes Peak out in I guess that's Colorado, right? Well, she wrote a poem called Graves of Lyd in honor of her family reunion in 1913. And it talks about how our ancestors are alive in us. You know, the color of your hair, the shape of your nose, the way your elbow works, or your gait that you use when you're walking or running, or even your temperaments, like the things you do when you're mad, or the feelings you have of stuffing them, or whatever the traits that we have live on in us from our ancestors. And that was a part of the poem that influenced Nell Carroll Thornton to go write down these stories in a notebook in 1933. The other piece is I've been doing the docent work, as Linda said, at the Carroll Homestead. First of all, who has lived in Southwest Harbor all your life and not been to the Carroll Homestead yet? Anybody here? Has everybody been to the Carroll Homestead that's here? Oh, I'm talking to the choir. But it's a wonderful place to go visit and to spend some time reflecting on your own life and on the life of your ancestors. Well, working as a docent there over the years, which sort of just started by accident, and then it got a little bit busier. I now am still doing that. Hopefully next year they'll invite me back. But over the years, people have said, please write these stories down that you're telling us. And yes, they had been written as vignettes in the notebook that Nell Carroll Thornton wrote herself in 1933, but they weren't accessible to everybody, and they were never connected all together in a story that talked about the family and how it got here. So that's why Lydia Stories was finally written And I do have to say a thank you to one of the school teachers at Bar Harbor Emerson School, elementary school, Sue Hersey, who I happened to go to high school with, said to me, please write them down. I'll do anything to help you write them down. And so she really encouraged me. And in 2015, I started to write the stories. And for 6 years, I wrote them during the month of April, which is the only time I had off. And my day job wouldn't allow me to kind of do both back and forth. So 6 years, I wrote the Lydia stories in the month of April. And then by 2021, 22, I needed to finish it. So I started working on it full time. Here's the front cover. And the book does come in hardcover and in softcover. And I thought I would just start with showing you a little bit about the pictures where the woman on the left front top is Nell Carroll Thornton. So you can see I didn't inherit the good looks of the family, but she is a wonderful, she's just as warm as that picture looks. She was a wonderful woman. I knew her for about 10 years. And in her older age, she had just pure white hair. She was a lovely presence, very reserved, restrained. She lived on the high road and very astute and very notices everything. I remember going there and she knew and could remember what she had seen the last time I was there. She knew what I liked. She paid attention to people. It was her one wonderful aspect of her life that was that I remember. Just a word to the book cover itself, which was designed by Tom Morgan, who designed the Ralph Stanley book that the library has also published. But Tom Morgan is amazing. He could see the book before I could. I could sort of hear the book, but I couldn't see it. I couldn't see how it was going to present itself, but Tom could, and he put together these amazing photographs and the stories. The picture under Nell Carroll Thornton is the 3 dolls that were made by Rebecca Carroll, remember, who married Jacob Carroll, the son of John Carroll. And she was a seamstress, a professional seamstress for the whole town of Southwest Harbor. She could make anything. She was a whiz. So she made dolls, cloth dolls, for her grandchildren whenever they were made. And she'd had 11 children, so there were a lot of grandchildren on the way, and she was busy. Those 3 happened to be made for the family that I descend from. The picture on the bottom is a picture of the old Carroll house, probably taken in the 1890s. The original house did not have the second chimney, the smaller chimney. There was an end to the house right at the end of the kitchen. There was no back parlor. There was no back bedroom. So that was taken after 1850 because that's when the addition was made. But it shows you an early picture of the homestead. And then the map on the right is just to get us oriented, and I'll have other maps that I'll show you later, but just to show you, this is an early map of Southwest Harbor. On the left, you can see Greening Island, which was then called Langley, and then Northeast Harbor across the Sound, and the 2 cranberries of there, Sutton and Bear Island as well. The picture on the top right is a picture of the 3rd generation of Carrolls who lived and were all born in the Carroll Homestead. We'll get to them a little later, but those are the main themes of the book, so they come together beautifully on the cover. Here's Nell again. She was the oldest daughter of Jacob and Rebecca Carroll, born in 1871, a year after they were married. Jacob married at the age of 40. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, his wife, Rebecca, was 27 because they had 10 children together. Nell, being the oldest, she married a judge from Holton, Maine, named Seth Thornton, but she never had children. One can understand that she probably brought up all of the younger Carroll children, her siblings, and she had her turn at being a mother. So she went into studying and being a teacher, being a historian, and moved back when Seth Thornton died, she moved back to Southwest Harbor to be part of the life of this town and to bring some culture alive into the town of Southwest Harbor, including this library, instrumental in starting this library. And in 1926, she put herself with one niece. She put herself on a ship and went to Borrisoleigh Ireland, all by herself to research the family and origins in the County Tipperary. And then she compiled the notebook in 1933 with Catherine Lee Bates' poem right in the front, and quoting lots of scripture as well about we learn from our past. And then in 1960, that notebook was reissued by a descendant of hers, of the Carroll family, and in a mimeograph form. Remember those old purple mimeograph things and you got ink all over you? Well, I have one of those books. I don't have a 1933 book. Here are the three dolls. Susan is on the left. Billy is in the middle. Lydia is on the right. You can see their dates of being sewn or their births anyway, 1905 for Billy, 1907 for Susan, and 1911 for Lydia. They were sewn from cloth remnants. So the cloth dolls that Rebecca made were compiled of different remnants of cloth from all the pants, the shirts, the coats, everything that was used and worn out. And we were all cut by all the family members from all sides of the family. Because Rebecca was a seamstress, a professional seamstress, people saved her remnants and they gave her remnants from the family. So she had baskets and baskets of remnants, and she would make a doll out of those remnants. Now that tells you how Lydia got to know the stories, because in those remnants were the stories that happened to the people who were wearing them. And so they're present tense stories to Lydia because they're alive inside of her. And that's why the book is written mostly in the present tense, because for Lydia, those people are still alive. And those adventures that happened to them are still alive. So Lydia is a very, very special member of the family. Billy and Susan also live with me too, but it's Lydia that's the real scribe here of the family. So here's the Carroll Homestead again. It was this was taken around 1890, so a little clearer. You can even see the well platform right here on the right was right at the backside, clearly collecting all the spring runoff from the mountaintop, which was then called Dog Mountain, right? We now call it Saint-Sauveur, but it's really Dog Mountain to the Carroll family, and therefore the well, which was dug, never ran dry. It always had this wonderful stream of water coming down the granite sides of Dog Mountain. It was a 1.5 story, so they did have an upper 2 rooms, actually, one for the for sleeping, and then one for all the sewing materials, all those baskets of remnants. It was the second house in Southwest Harbor to have plaster on the walls. It had horsehair plaster, of course, but it had the wooden lathing, and then it had birch bark on the outside of the lathing, and then it had shingles on the outside of birch bark. It was a palace. In 1825, nobody lived in a house like this. And John Carroll built it with his own hands. This shows you a little bit closer. I'm going to show you. This is based on a map from 1808, taken as a survey map done by Samuel Town Jr. of the entire map of Mount Desert Island. And this is Dog Mountain. This is Pine Mountain. This is Dog Mountain. So here's Fernal Point, and this is called Fernal's Cove before Mike Connors moved in here, which is now called Connors Point. This was all part of the land that was John Carroll's by possession. He did not buy that particular piece of land. It was originally part of a land grant, and he wanted to build a house up high with a vista out over some sound. So from this point where his house is, he could look straight out, right out to all of the Greening Island, some sound. You can see everywhere. The trees had been cleared, and the ledges were open when he built his house up there. Right now, as you go up there, it looks like it's hidden in woods. So we're working on the park to clear some of those trees. So here's our narrator, Lydia, in all her glory, in her original dress. We were just showing her off, just so you get an idea of Lydia's personality. When she turned 100 in 2011, we got her a new dress. She only had one dress for 100 years. And it was a little worn, as you can see that trail there. Well, she got a new dress at age 100, but we kept all of her original underslips. So here's the embroidered underslip that Rebecca made for her in 1911. You can come up and see them after. Here's the flannel one to keep her warm, like layers, and the bloomers. And she had originally silk stockings, but she runs and she ran them all. She wore those socks out because she ran all the time. And I don't know how it works, and Lydia doesn't know because Rebecca wouldn't tell her how it works, but there's no weight, there's no strings, and I'm not pressing any buttons. So Lydia was born to run and tell stories. And so that's how Lydia lives her life. She rests all winter, and then she gets up and runs in the spring and the summer. So she's a little rusty tonight. But that her memory is the remnant memory of the remnants inside of her. So she's carrying the stories that are in the book. So Lydia is made by Rebecca in 1911 because one of Rebecca's daughters, named Sarah Tenney Carroll, was pregnant with her third child. And they knew they were going to have a little girl. They thought they were going to have a little girl, but they couldn't come up with a name for her. Sarah had married Wilfred Kittredge, the great-great-grandson of Dr. Kendall Kittredge, the first doctor on the island, who was from Soamesville, and moved his wife, Sarah, into the Kittredge house, which is still existent in Bass Harbor across from the elementary school in Tremont. So right across the street is this huge behemoth house. Many of you knew Bill and Tina Baker, who owned that house and renovated it. It's beautiful inside right now. So this is the house as it was built. It was built originally, the first picture we have of it is down here on the left, probably about 1883, 85. A little bit later, you can see it for the little girl in front on the picket fence. A little bit older, it's probably the early 1900s. And here, I just think this is a great picture because it shows the road across the Bass Harbor Marsh to their house. And you can see the old dike that blocked the water when they wanted to grow salt marsh hay up in the Bass Harbor Marsh. They would close the dike. So that would keep all the water out and they could grow their hay. And lots of people, including John Carroll, bought 2 acres of salt marsh hay in Bass Harbor to feed his animals in the winter. So Lydia goes to the Kittredge house. She goes in there with Rebecca one day when the baby was born in March, and Lydia goes in with Rebecca and she looks at that baby and says, that baby's name is Evelyn. Nobody had a name Evelyn before in the family, but that was where she got her name, was Lydia knew what it was. She went in there. And so Evelyn and Lydia became soulmates, best friends the rest of Evelyn's life. And Evelyn turned out to have 3 children, and I'm one of them. the youngest. And Evelyn died in 1983, and Lydia came to live with me. And so that's how we got to know each other. So it's a handing it on. And now I have two granddaughters, Emery and Lydia. So I'm all ready. Hand her on. There's the Kittredge family. That's Wilford and Sarah sitting outside the Kittredge house. Don't you love the bike with Milton? That was Billy was made from Milton in 1905. And Ruth on the left, obviously looking into the sun and not happy. And then Evelyn, probably about 1911 or 12, sitting on Sarah's lap. And I have to tell you, the cat's name that Wilford is holding is Smut, but I'm not going to put that up on it. So there's Evelyn at age probably 1.5 or 2. She's holding Lydia. See her in her hands up there in the left, and she's a two-handed toy player here. She's got a wagon down on her feet on the other hand. These wooden walkways that she's on were what was put on the ground in front of the Kittredge house. And it was so amazing to play on them. They were still there when I was born, and I was playing there in the 1950s. I loved them. You could go this way or that way. You could go any way you wanted, and you could pull something behind you, and you could run around. It was just it was just wooden walkways, but it was so much fun that I remember that fondly from their house. Across the street is the Eaton Clark house that burned in that probably 1917-ish, right around there. But it was a duplicate actually of the Kittredge house. And Eaton and his son Eben helped Osborne and Benjamin Kittredge build the Kittredge house. So that was all one little conclave right there in Bass Harbor. Osborne ran a general store there, which is why they moved there and lived there. So here we come to John Carroll. John was born in 1790 in the little village of Borrisoleigh in the county Tipperary in the country of Ireland, in the parish of Drum. So you have to know who you are in Ireland. You have to know your parish, your village, your county. We know a little bit about his grandparents, Samuel and Hannah Lloyd Carroll, and we know his parents, William and Elizabeth Cook Carroll. And here you have, nobody's gonna be able to see Borrisoleigh, but it's going to be, here's Dublin up here, and Borrisoleigh is right in here. So you can see how central it is, but it's landlocked. So he had any knowledge of the ocean at all growing up. He lived there for about 20 years. He loved his grandfather Samuel's farm. And Samuel was actually a prosperous farmer. He had married a daughter of a nobleman from Temple Moor. And they looked down at Samuel and his family for being farmers. But he eventually became more prosperous than they were. And so they had to kind of cozy up to them later on. But Samuel said, well, they made a man out of me by opposing our marriage. And I learned to live with that and to overcome it. Carroll trait number 1. So Samuel and Hannah had a son, William, who didn't like farming, didn't want anything to do with farming, agriculture, nothing. He wanted to go prepare for the priesthood. He wanted to study religion. He went to the University of Dublin. He loved it. Only he didn't love Catholicism. And he decided at the last minute not to become a priest. And he instead left the school, which was very disappointing to Samuel and to Hannah. But he came home to Borrisoleigh, and they found a civil government job for him. And Samuel built him a house high up on a vista, a stone house. So when William and Elizabeth Cook finally married, and Elizabeth Cook was a Protestant from an English family, marrying a Catholic son in the middle of smack dab of Tipperary, they had the first child, John, born in 1790, who grew up in a household with a very open-minded conversation at dinner time. You imagine how to face all of the prejudices, the hard feelings, the deep feelings about Protestants in Ireland, the English in Ireland. But that's how John Carroll was formed, if you will. He loved his grandfather and he loved farming. So, we're skipping a generation here, isn't it? Sort of, doesn't that happen in families? You come back to your roots after you deny everything to do with them and not wanting to be with them, then the next generation comes back. So John Carroll loved farming. He loved everything to do with being in the woods, training dogs, hunting, fishing. He was trained in the arts of boxing, wrestling, fencing. He would keep all those traits, if you will, active in his life. He was very proud of them, and they all came into use during his lifetime. When he was about 20 years old, he got mixed up in a little skirmish against English tax collectors in Borrisoleigh, and the English sheriff decided to issue a warrant for their arrest for treason against the English king. So poor John was faced with running away, hiding, or leaving. And they decided Elizabeth had relatives in Newfoundland, in St. John's. And so John was put on a ship in 1814, May 24th, 1814, and sent off to Newfoundland, to St. John's, to escape being arrested for treason. The outcome of that wasn't really good. So you would be hung by the English. So that's why he leaves Ireland. He really thought, well, things will calm down. I'll come back. We'll restore the farm to the Carroll name, and he will take up farming. But he never comes back. He never sees Ireland again. He never sees a family member again. There's the St. John's Harbor. You can see it's a very protected harbor, probably taken in the 19th century. He lives there with his family's relatives, the Burkes, and he gets a job doing masonry. He grew up in a stone house. He learned how to do masonry from all the men who had to repair it, take care of that house. So he knew how to do that. There wasn't much of a growing season in Newfoundland, so he couldn't really farm. But he didn't want to fish either. He did not really like the ocean. He meets a young man named Michael Bolger, who's a carpenter, and they become best friends, and they can build a house together. So that's what they start doing in Newfoundland. But in the late winter, all the able-bodied men in Newfoundland go to the ice, which is seal hunting. It's the most hideous, dangerous industry I think I've ever read about. Men get on ships, sometimes 50 men apiece on each ship. They sail north into the Labrador Straits until the ice freezes the ship fast and they can't get out, they can't move. The men then get off the ship in teams of 5 men each. They put nails down through the boots, their soles of their boots, so they can walk on this pack ice, which is really cakes of ice and fissures and crevasses, and they walk across the ice sometimes a mile and a half to the edge of the ice floe where the harp seals are breeding, and they shoot or they gaff each man a couple of seals as much as they can. Then they skin those seal pelts. All they want is the pelts. This is the 19th century white man. What can I say? They want the pelts because they're valuable at the markets all over the world. So they get their pelts, they tie them together, and they walk back across the ice floe, a mile and a half to the ship. They put the pelts in the ship's hold, and enough pelts get there after a few weeks that the ship is heavy enough it can break through the ice. Then it can leave and take those pelts back to St. John's, put them on another ship that's being sailed around the world, and go to the world ports. And each of the men who does that gets a piece of the winnings, if you will, or the whatever the value is that is made, the profits from those pelts. One day, John Carroll is with a team of 5 men, and they get their 5 seals and then a few more besides that. They've shot them successfully. They walk from the ship. They skin those seals. They tie them together. They get ready to turn around and go back to the ship. And they realize the ice they're standing on is separated from the ice where the ship is. And there's open water between them and the ship. Ouch. The wind starts blowing really hard from the west, blows them on an iceberg out into the North Atlantic. For 3 days, they're on an iceberg. They run around, they keep warm, they wrap themselves in the seal skins, they eat some of the seal meat. At the end of the 3rd day, they give up hope. Nobody's going to rescue them. They don't have any way of letting people know. Often guys are lost. That's just part of why it's so dangerous. So on the 3rd night, they lie down on the ice. John wraps the seal skins over his head so the birds won't peck his eyes before he's quite dead. And they figure they're just going to go to sleep. In the middle of the night, one of the other team members, who's a sailor, wakes up because he senses the wind has shifted out of the west. It's now blowing out of the east, and it's blowing them back towards where they started. He wakes them all up. He says, get up, run around. This might turn out better. We don't know, but look, the wind has shifted. So they jump up, they run around on the 4th day, and that iceberg floats all the way back at that strong east wind, and it clunks into the ice where the ships are, and they get off and they run back to the ship with the pelts. And none of them dies of hypothermia. Not one of them loses a digit to frostbite. But John Carroll looks at Michael and he says, I don't want to do that anymore. So he turns around and he says to Michael, all right, we need a way out of here. So they decide, they knew their history. They knew in 1812, the English, dastardly English, had come over and burned Washington, D.C. to the ground, this new capital. And that if they, a carpenter and a mason, could get down to Washington, D.C., they'd have plenty of work. So they look for the first ship going south and they find it. It's captained by Patrick Sullivan, good Irish name. They sign the passenger manifest, they get on board, and at the last minute before they weigh anchor, Patrick Sullivan says, I don't actually know the way down the eastern seaboard, which doesn't give great confidence in the captain. He says, I'll need some help. So next to them is a ship captained by John Manchester, whose home port is Northeast Harbor. So John Manchester swaps a navigator, Peter Savage, for John Carroll, a crew member. And they get swapped. And so both ships leave together and they'd come all the way safely to Great Cranberry Island, where they encountered 2 policemen waiting to arrest Patrick Sullivan for stealing the ship. Only Patrick Sullivan has disappeared and they can't find him. The policemen search the ship. They can't find him, but they found the passenger manifest with John Carroll's name and Michael Bolger's name at the top, and they arrest Michael and John for stealing Patrick Sullivan's ship. And they're totally innocent, but what can you say? They have to arrest them. They've arrested them. They have to take them to the capital of Maine now. This is 1820. Maine just became a state in the Missouri Compromise. So in March of 1820, Maine became a state. So the capital of Maine, the first capital, is Portland. So they take John and Michael to Portland to stand trial for stealing the ship. Michael was on that ship, but John wasn't on that ship, but their names were on that ship. So they stand trial. They ask John if he wants a lawyer, and John says, I don't need a lawyer, I'm innocent. So he represents himself, the judge believes him, all of the jury believes him, and they are exonerated and sent back to Great Cranberry Island. So there we are in 1820. They're ready to continue the trip down to Washington, D.C. And John Manchester says, I'm not going anywhere. It's hurricane season on the eastern seaboard. You guys can stay here on my ship, but I'm not taking you to Washington, D.C. until the spring. And they say, well, we don't have much choice. There's no Greyhound bus. There's nothing. They've got to go by sea. And so they need work if they're going to pay room and board. So they go to work in Southwest Harbor, building houses for all of the new people coming to Maine. to live in Mount Desert Island in Southwest Harbor until the ground freezes. Then they have to work for a lumber crew organized by the Fernald family. And they go to work in the winter, January of 1821. They're cutting trees down at the base of Beech Mountain. And John Carroll's axe slips on a frozen tree trunk and he cuts his foot badly. They get him in an ox cart. They wheel him to the nearest home owned by Jacob Lurvy, and they get him inside, they clean him up. They send for Dr. Kendall Kittredge, who comes and sews his foot up. And Dr. Kendall Kittredge says, you're going to save your foot, but you're going to have to stay in this house for a couple of weeks. You can't go back out on that ship. They'll open it up and it'll be infected and you'll lose your foot, if not your life. And John didn't want to impose on the Lurvy family. They had 11 children. And they lived on the Lurvy Spring Road at the Lurvy Spring. And so they said, no, you have to stay. And so he meets all of those 11 children, one of whom is a daughter named Rachel Foster Lurvy, who was a year younger than John, born in 1791. And they're married. They fall in love and married in 1822. So there's the first picture we have of that generation. There's Rachel. A force not to be taken lightly. She's the matriarch, clearly. She's been in an MDI all her life. Her sister marries John Gilly, the lighthouse keeper on Baker Island, and Rachel goes to visit her when she's 12 years old and gets so homesick for MDI that she can't wait to get back on the main island. And she finds a little stone called a hag stone or an adder stone or a witch's stone with a hole in the middle of it that is always considered a very lucky stone, has magic properties to it. And she puts a string through it, a piece of yarn, and she hangs it from her bedstead corner for the rest of her life. She gives it to all the next matriarchs. It plays a part in Lydia's stories. Jacob Lurvy is their son. They have 6 children, 5 girls, 1 boy. They live on a subsistence farm. So John gets his, finally he gets to do his farming. He lays out his gardens beautifully, root gardens, vegetable gardens, flower gardens, herb gardens. He even has an asparagus garden. I didn't even know how to pronounce it in Southwest Harbor, but he brought that asparagus garden to life on Dog Mountain. Jacob, this is Jacob, the slide you see here is Rachel's father, Jacob Lurvy, and he has some adventures which you have to read the book to find out because they're really, really fun. He goes to the Revolutionary War as a soldier. He gets stranded in the Sargasso Sea. He gets impressed in the English Navy and escapes. There's lots of harrowing adventures for Rachel's father, Jacob. Dog Mountain, as I said before, which is now named Saint Sever, really was mostly uninhabited. It was wilderness. There was no road. So Route 102 didn't exist. The road to Soamesville went up and over Beech Mountain to Beech Hill Road, right past Linda's house. But John had fallen in love with the side of it, facing east. The side of Dog Mountain was just ledges. It had not gotten forested. Where he built his house was forested. That's what he had to clear. And then he had to cut into the granite. But he wanted to live up high and look out over a vista, and he didn't want to live inside the town. Everybody thought he was crazy. But he said, I want to build my house there. And they said, well, if you can build it there, then you'll have it by right of possession, which he did. It was about a 50-acre lot 115 on Salem Town Junior's survey map in 1808. So by the time of Thanksgiving came around in 1825, I'm not sure the first meal was in 2025 or not, but I think it was 1825. I can see I have a little correction to make on there. That the house was finished and they moved in for the first meal Thanksgiving, 1825. There you can see that's actually a picture of Jacob and Rebecca standing in front of the house with their dog. And what's great about this is that you can see the barn. The barn no longer standing. You can see the foundation for the barn. They built it in 1830, and it fell down in the 1940s. I don't remember it. So you can see they did have a barn. They had cleared everything you see that's cleared. He had to cut and clear by himself. And notice the wood pile. There's not a stick out of place. So Jacob, John's son, Jacob, who became a sea captain, ran his house like a ship. And so everything was ship shape. So John, mason, carpenter, farmer. Here you can see the house from above, up on the side of Dog Mountain, looking down at the house. And you can just see the roof of the barn over there on the right side. No road. Notice there's one trail that leads off to go into Southwest Harbor, but there was no road out there. And here's their youngest daughter. They had, as I say, 6 children: Elizabeth, Hannah, Rachel, Jacob, Kate, and Mary Ann. And here's Mary Ann, who never married, who was a school teacher for 50 plus years in the state of Maine. And when she came to call and you hadn't done your homework, you were in trouble. So in 1867, John dies. He deeds the property to Jacob. And he deeds it, but he also sells it to him. So Jacob pays $550 for the 2 lots that John has acquired. And here's Jacob. We have a picture of him, the sea captain, born in 1830 at the Mountain House. And at 14, he leaves to go to the sea, and he stays in the sea until he's 40 years old. Here's a picture of his wife, Rebecca, at age 19 during the Civil War. The picture was taken. She actually marries a cousin of Jacob's first, Enoch Lurvy, but he gets lost at sea, and so she's a widow at age 27. And that's when Jacob asks her to marry him in 1870. And she agrees to do that. She wasn't too happy about moving into the wilderness. So the Mountain House was still the wilderness, and she was a city girl, town girl. So she really loved the town of Southwest Harbor and used to make lots of trips down there to see her family. And she was a Whitmore. The Whitmore house was on the Long Hill on the way out of Southwest Harbor to go to Bass Harbor, and you go up the hill. It's one of those houses on the right. I have to ask Marla O'Brien which one it is, because she would know. She lives in one. And here are their 10 children plus 1. The plus 1 was the little boy that Rebecca had with her first husband. He came into the family as a half brother. So when my generation came along, we had to learn their names in order to get our supper. So I'm singing it to you. It was a song that they made up so you could remember their names. And it went to Pop Goes the Weasel. Well, I'm not going to sing that, but I'll sing you the ditty, and then you sing it back to me. You get your supper. Ready? Ian and Nell and Gert and Fan, John and Kate and Alice, Sade and Grace, Lloyd and Ma, Pa and Anna Beatrice. Ready? Well, you can sing it to Pop Goes the Weasel if you keep this, if I kept that up there long enough. The little girl on the far left is Sarah. That's my grandmother. She was born in 1880. She's about 8 in this picture. She's standing next to Nell. You can see Jacob next to Nell sitting down, and Rebecca over here with the baby, and next to her, the oldest man, which is her son, Enoch. So the rest are all those 8 girls, 2 boys, and they're running a subsistence farm. They're standing at the back door of their house, and they're looking very miserable, because this was an itinerant photographer going up the road in 1888, taking their picture if they would like it. And the parents must have said, yeah, we love it. And the kids said, oh no. They had to get into their Sunday clothes. They had to stand interminably long and look at the camera. So it wasn't a fun thing for them. The only time this was taken they never had another family photo ever of the whole family, because the young woman behind the boy in the middle, which is John Carroll, and just to his right, with the buttons down the front on her black dress, Fanny, dies the very next year of consumption. She's the only one who didn't live into old age. And she is amazing that they didn't all contract it. Tuberculosis, right? Consumption. She died in that house. And here they all are, 7 of them at school. This is the one room Norwood School, Norwood Cove School, probably situated across from where the golf course is now, right on the Fernal Point Road. And 7 of the Carrolls are in there. Nell and Gert. Gert is the woman on the far left in the back row, and she had epilepsy all her life, so she didn't go to school very often. So this is a very unique photo. She would have grand mal seizures, and they didn't trust her to go off to school and then not be able to take care of her. But she's there on this particular day. And my grandmother is in the front row, the smallest little girl. So they're all there, 7 of them. Here's some of Sarah's siblings. Sarah is the long, tall, beautiful woman in the center. And to her left is Gertrude. To her right is her youngest sister, Annie Beatrice. She was the lone sister who went off to college, to Rickard, to Holton, where Nell lived. And then here's Nell herself at a younger age. And there's Lloyd, the youngest of the 2 boys. Lloyd loved hunting and training dogs, just like Samuel. See? And there's 3 of them. The lady on the left, Viola, was John Carroll's wife, married in about 1896. And then the 2 sisters, Grace and Alice. And I love this photo because they're laughing, they're happy. And look at their straw hats. One of their sisters goes off to Lowell, Massachusetts to work in a straw hat factory, and then sends them back to their sisters, and they love dressing up. And they're just sitting out under the apple tree at the homestead. And what you see behind them is the vista that would open up if we took down the trees that are blocking the vista. They love there. And there was Viola's 3 of her children are there. The oldest, Winifred, the next child, Wesley, and then Charles. She would have 6 children. And they all stayed there when it was each time when John died, Rachel was asked if she wanted to move into Southwest Harbor, and she said, no, I want to stay in that house forever. Rebecca was asked when Jacob died, do you want to move into Southwest Harbor? She said, yes. And so John moved into the house. So there's the story. There's John with his children and Viola. There's, when they're older, they had 4 sons and 2 daughters. They were all born in the mountain house. And there's the old family tree, but you don't have to memorize that to get your supper. And there you go. That's the story of the Carroll family. The end of the book ends with something called Under the Ice, which is where they all get to meet each other again, according to Lydia. Dee Dee Hayden is the overseer under the ice, lives under the ice, and makes sure life is orderly under the ice. And then the land of Lyd, the wisdom of Lyd, which is taken from the poem by Catherine Lee Bates, is the world under the ice. And sometimes it's available to those who live above the ice, but who want to live inside themselves in the same way that they would live if they were under the ice. And then there's the old hagstone. That's how Lydia and Evelyn get through to going under the ice, is through the hole in the hagstone. Think Alice in Wonderland. And promised time is what they meet under the ice. Thank you. Any questions? Oh, sorry.
Testing. Yes.
Tell me where to stop.
Where are the 6 generations? Right there, yes, I just thought. I would like to look at it.
Sure.
Like,
Yep.
I guess I didn't, that might lead to another question, but it hasn't yet. So
Sure.
I'll pass the microphone to whoever.
Sure. It is the last page in the book, so you get to see it printed out. It's what I didn't put in there were death dates for the last 4 generations. It just didn't, it looked too much, like too much information. So I put their birth dates. And so that everybody that's on this chart was the generation, the last one is the 6th generation. So it's the children of Jacob and Rebecca and their children. And that's where it ends. So I didn't follow the Carroll family beyond 1911. That's when Lydia comes to tell Evelyn, for whom she's going to name her and for whom she's built, the story of the Carroll family. So that's who's telling, and why Lydia's the narrator. So she tells the stories to Evelyn. And I didn't follow it past Evelyn's generation. So those all would be cousins of Evelyn.
We have a question from the online audience.
Yes.
Of which there are 14.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, really enjoyed your talk. This is from Brian Richter. Are the Carrolls related to the signer of the Declaration of Independence, Charles Carroll of Carrollton?
We don't believe so, although the Carroll family was an extensive tribe, if you will, in 3 or 4 different counties in Ireland. And we actually include a picture of the 2 Carrolls who are more famous. So the signer of the Declaration and the first Catholic Archbishop of Baltimore was a Carroll. We have the 2 pictures in the book, just so you know that there's a Carroll heritage, that they may have been related distantly, but we don't know any particular connection with them. Mary?
I think some of the girls have actually gone back to Ireland, and John Carroll's home when he was young is still there. Is that correct?
I do not know that for sure. I think that when Nell went back in 1926, she could not find that home, and she could not find actual relics from when the Carrolls were there. But she got as much as she could from the church records, but a lot of things had burned and they were lost in fires. So she did not actually say that she saw the original homestead, although when she went up on a hill in Borrisoleigh and turned around and looked at the vista, she said, I know where he came from. I know it had to be there.
Well, I was lucky enough to go to Ireland in May for 3 weeks, and many of the older homes are like the Carroll Homestead, the barns, the houses, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
The Carroll Homestead, one of them you showed us, it looked like there was evergreens all on the base of the house.
Yes.
And was that just for insulation?
Yes. Yeah. They banked it. We still, a lot of us do that now, right?
While you're looking for that, I can't remember, is the house built on stone?
The house has a cellar under it, if you can believe that, with just his saws, his tools, his oxen, his help with his brother-in-laws and Michael Bolger. They dug a cellar, which is just amazing. And they used fieldstone, of course, they had plenty of that. And then he quarried some granite up further up on Dog Mountain for the cellar walls. So you can go in there and still see the amazing job he had to do. When they added the addition in 1850, he didn't do another cellar. He'd had enough digging in the granite. But that first cellar, he needed it for his refrigerator. So that's where he stored his milk, his eggs, his cheese, where he stored the fruit, the vegetables, and the wood. And he didn't put his fireplace flue down on the floor of the cellar. He put it on beams, and they're still there. They're a little spongy, but they're 200 years old. And therefore the park only has a few people go in at a time with the kitchen. But those beams are what holding that entire chimney flue up. Yeah, it's pretty.
Is it high enough so that you can stand up?
Yes, he wanted to make sure he could stand up. Of course, he was 5'1", probably. But he wanted to be able to stand up in it. And you can stand up in it. If you're 6'2", you'd have a little stoop. But you can go in there and see that today.
There's also another place they have on the property. As you come in from where the barn was, and then you're facing the house, and I guess what would be to do it. You could stand there that way. Up to the left, there's not very high up on what could be the mountain. There's something that looks like no, I don't know, a spring bed or an area that looks like it's an open cistern almost, and the spring is there. Is that a thing, or am
I'm not familiar with it. It could have been used. They had to water the animals frequently, probably more frequently in some seasons. So they could have had other places, but the main well was right at the back door of their house.
Okay.
He did clear 50 more acres past the barn for pasturage. Yeah. Yeah, and he acquired the deed to those other 50 acres was passed through a clerk's office in Boston, and it's signed by John Quincy Adams. So you can go into Ellsworth at the Registry of Deeds and see the deed that John Carroll signed and John Quincy Adams signed. It's very cool.
We have a question from the audience. How frequently is the homestead open to visit?
It varies each year, but for the last 2 years, it's been open starting in mid-June from Tuesday to Saturday, from usually about 9 or 10 to 3 in the afternoon. And I usually get to go a couple times a week. So this past year it was Wednesday and Friday. But they are open, the rangers there, they know the stories. Everybody knows the stories. The fourth graders still come in May and before school is out, and they spend a whole day there learning about the 19th century life in Southwest Harbor and what it was like, all the crafts and the games and how they dressed and a little bit of the stories, and they all meet Lydia. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you so much, Joan.
You're welcome.
This was excellent. I'm inspired. I now want to go spend more time there and learn more about it.